The door creaked when I stepped inside, and the first thing I heard was his laughter, sharp, wild, almost manic. It echoed through the stillness of our home like something out of place, something wrong, but I didn't know how. Not yet. I had spent the whole day at work, the weight of my quiet routine pressing down on me like a fog. My husband, Lucas, had been distant lately, my may have ASTF, but nothing that would have prepared me for this moment. The sight of him sitting in our kitchen, laughing uncontrollably as he handed me a letter from a lawyer. It wasn't the laughter that caught me off guard, though. It was the words on that letter, cold and clinical, telling me that 10 years of marriage had been null and void. But the real shock? To see Fines of verses of Rexilem and Pratompt. The man I thought I knew, the one who had shared every dream and every silence with me, had already planned for someone else to replace me. I stepped through the door, and the first thing I heard was his laughter. It wasn't soft. Not like the laughter we used to share, the kind that came from inside, all warm and familiar. No. This was sharp, too loud, bouncing off the walls of the kitchen like it was meant to hurt. His laughter. It echoed and echoed until I couldn't tell if it was still his voice or just the room repeating it. Ka. I stood frozen in the doorway. The letter was still in my hand. I don't remember if I even closed the door behind me. Everything around me seemed too still, like the world had stopped. A light coming through the window, pale and weak, didn't seem to reach the kitchen, as though it, too, had decided to leave us alone. Lucas didn't notice me, not at first. His face was flushed, his eyes wide, the kind of wide that made me feel like I wasn't even there. Like I wasn't even real. It wasn't just the laughter. It was the way he looked at me, like I was nothing more than a shadow standing in the corner. I took a step forward, but my feet felt heavy, like the floor was trying to hold me back. I opened my mouth to call his name, but the sound didn't come. It caught in my throat, heavy and stuck, like something was pressing down on it. Hey, cat. His laughter, though, didn't stop. It was too much, too wild. It made me want to run, to pull the door closed and walk away from the whole thing. But I didn't. I stayed. I felt the weight of the letter in my hand, cold now. The words on it were starting to blur together, the ink smudged with my shaking fingers. Lucas? My voice finally found its way out. He didn't answer. His laugh twisted, but his eyes never left whatever he was looking at. I tried again. Lucas, nothing. Just the wild sound of him, laughing as though he'd heard some joke I didn't get. As though he was living in some other world. The room felt too small, too close. My breath came quick, sharp, and I realized I was standing still, holding on to the letter like it could somehow protect me. It didn't. I stepped closer, the air around me thick with silence between the laughs, and still he didn't look at me. His face was flushed like he'd been running, like something was chasing him. But I wasn't chasing him. I wasn't even sure if he saw me anymore. My fingers tightened around the letter. The words were still there, plain as day. Your 10 years of marriage are null. But I couldn't make sense of them, not now, not with him like this. I took another step. This time, my foot creaked on the floor, a sound so quiet, but it felt like it shattered the whole room. Lucas finally turned his head, but only slightly. His eyes moved slowly over me, like I wasn't quite real. I wanted to scream. Wani has to scream, haver chale. I wanted to scream, to ask him why, to shake him and demand that he stop. But I just stood there. Jan Lucas, I said again. My voice was softer now, almost broken. He blinked, like he hadn't expected to see me. His eyes lingered on the letter in my hand. Then he smiled, but it wasn't a real smile. Not the kind that reached his eyes, not the one I'd grown used to. This smile, it was too wide, too forced, like he was pretending to be something he wasn't. Did you read it? He asked, his voice so casual it almost sounded rehearsed. I couldn't answer. My throat felt tight again, and I wondered if he even cared enough to notice. I nodded slowly, the letter still cold and unrelenting in my hand. I read it. His laugh started again, but quieter this time, like he couldn't quite control it anymore. I tried to speak again, but my words didn't come out right. I opened my mouth, and it was like I was watching myself from somewhere far away. Lucas was still laughing. He wiped his eyes, as if something had made them wet. His hands shook, and it made me feel like I was the one losing grip on everything. It felt like I had stepped into a room I didn't belong in. Like the life we had built together had suddenly morphed into something strange, something that didn't make sense. I could feel my heartbeat in my chest, slow and heavy. My hand still gripped the letter, and it was like it was keeping me tethered to the moment, to this version of our life that no longer felt like mine. I don't understand," I finally whispered. Lucas wiped his eyes again, the laughter still lingering in his throat. He looked at me, and for the first time since I walked in, there was something in his gaze. But it wasn't pity, it wasn't even guilt, it was something else. "I already have someone else in mind," he said, his words simple, as though he was talking about the weather. The room closed in on me. I couldn't breathe. He didn't breathe, he didn't say anything else, didn't offer anything more. His eyes drifted away from mine, back to whatever invisible thing he was seeing, and I just stood there. The letter in my hand seemed too heavy now, like it carried the weight of everything I hadn't known. I wanted to ask him more, to yell at him, but he didn't even seem to notice. His laughter was gone now, replaced by something else. Something that felt like it had always been there, hidden just beneath the surface. I took a step back, but the world didn't feel real anymore. The house, the silence, the man in front of me, none of it felt like mine. And I wondered quietly if it ever had been. The sound of his laughter still lingered, echoing in the corners of my mind. The air in the room had changed. The laughter, once so loud and wild, had disappeared, leaving only a heavy silence. Lucas stood there, his face slack, eyes unfocused. I looked at him, but he didn't look at me. His gaze was distant, as though he was seeing something beyond the walls of our kitchen. I felt cold suddenly, as though the warmth of the house had slipped away, without me noticing. My hands were still gripping the letter, the edges curling slightly in my fingers. I didn't remember folding it, but there it was, a crisp piece of paper, its meaning already clear in the space between us. I took a breath, my chest tight. I unfolded the letter slowly. The words were there, staring back at me, clear and unforgiving. "Your 10 years of marriage are null." It didn't make sense. My hands shook just a little, but it was enough. Enough for me to feel it in my bones, the strange, distant coldness that seemed to have seeped into the room, into me. I read it again, my eyes skimming the words, trying to find some explanation in the cold, impersonal script. There was nothing. I lifted my eyes to Lucas, hoping, needing, something more from him. But his face was unreadable now. The man I had known, the man I thought I understood, was gone. His eyes never met mine, and I felt a sinking in my chest. "Heck, I don't understand," I said, my voice quieter than I intended. He didn't move. He didn't say anything. Just stood there, looking somewhere else, as if waiting for something. I couldn't breathe. I tried again. "Lucas, why?" He turned his head, just slightly, his gaze flicking to the letter in my hand before drifting away again. He didn't seem to care enough to meet my eyes. "It's just business," he said, his voice flat, detached. Just business, those words echoed in my mind. I couldn't make sense of them. I didn't want to, but I had to, just business. My fingers trembled as I held the letter in front of me, but I didn't look at it anymore. It was just a piece of paper, a cold, unforgiving thing. What it represented, that was real. But not the paper. I want to ask him more, to push for answers. I wanted to ask him more, to push for answers, but I couldn't find the words. My thoughts were tangled, and each time I tried to speak, they fell apart. I looked at him again, his back turned, his shoulders stiff, as though he was trying to hold everything in. But there was nothing left to hold. The cracks were already showing. What happened to us? I wanted to ask. But instead, I felt the coldness of the room creep deeper into my skin. I took another breath, steadying myself. I had to do something. I had to understand. I stepped closer, careful not to make any noise, but the floor creaked under my feet, and it felt like the world shifted. What do you mean by you business, Lucas?" My voice was barely above a whisper now, trembling with something I couldn't name. He shifted slightly, his back still turned, his fingers twitched, but he didn't speak. The silence stretched between us, thick and heavy. I glanced at the letter again, then back at him, hoping, desperate for something, anything, that would make sense of this. "Lucas," I said again, softer this time. "Why did you do this?" The question hung in the air, suspended. His voice when it came was quiet, almost too quiet. "I didn't mean for it to happen like this. But it was necessary. The words hit me like cold water. I couldn't process them, couldn't make sense of them, but they sat there, solid and real, in the space between us. I felt my heart race, but it wasn't with anger. It was something else, fear, maybe. Or just the hollow feeling that comes with realizing something you've built isn't what you thought it was. I opened my mouth to speak, but the words felt too far away. Everything felt too far away. Lucas turned then, slowly, his eyes not meeting mine. "I never meant to hurt you," he said, his voice flat, as though he was reciting a line he'd practiced. But it was time. I wanted to ask what he meant by that, what had changed, what had happened to the life we'd built, but I couldn't find the strength to ask. He had already answered. He'd already made his decision. The room felt too small, the walls closing in. Whoa, in. Okana. I wanted to run, to escape, but I couldn't move. I was trapped in this space, in this moment, with no way out. The letter was still in my hand, but I couldn't look at it anymore. The words on it didn't matter anymore. It was just a symbol of something bigger, something I didn't understand. I dropped the letter onto the kitchen counter, the sound too loud, too final. It wasn't just the end of our marriage. It was the end of everything I thought I knew about us. He didn't move, didn't even glance at the letter. His eyes were still focused on something far away. I stood there for a long moment, unsure of what to do. I wanted to reach out, to hold on to something, anything. But all I could do was stand there, watching the man I thought I knew, watching the stranger he had become. And in that moment I realized I didn't know him at all. The silence stretched between us, heavy and thick. I could feel it in my bones, the weight of it. But no matter how much I wanted to scream, I didn't. I just turned, slowly, and left. The door closed softly behind me, but the sound didn't feel final. Not yet. I wasn't ready for it to be over, but it was, and I didn't know what to do with that. I stood in the hallway for a long time, listening to the silence in the house, trying to make sense of what had just happened. But the house wouldn't tell me. It never had. It never would. The air around me was heavy with something I couldn't name. But the truth of it hung in the air, undeniable. The house felt different. I don't know when it changed, but the air was thick in a way it hadn't been before. Every creak of the floorboards under my feet felt louder than it should. The quiet hung in the corners like dust, waiting to settle. I walked from room to room, touching nothing, just moving, my footsteps slow and uncertain. The walls seemed closer, the windows smaller. The house wasn't the place I'd come home to anymore. It was a stranger, and so was I. The kitchen was still, the coffee maker unplugged. I'd forgotten to make the coffee this morning, but I didn't care. The silence stretched out, pressing against my ribs. I ran my fingers along the counter, my hand skimming the cold ceramic tiles. Everything was wrong, but nothing had changed. I turned to the hallway, then back again, unsure of where to go next. I couldn't sit down. I couldn't stand still. The weight of the house, of the absence, was too much. The walls felt like they were closing in, and I felt small, like I was shrinking with every breath I took. I walked toward the guest room. I don't know why I went there. Maybe I thought I could find some piece of us, something that still belonged. I opened the door and stepped inside. The room was unchanged, but it wasn't the same. The bed was still made, the blankets neatly folded, the pillow fluffed. But there was an emptiness there, like the room had been hollowed out. I stood at the foot of the bed, my fingers resting lightly on the wooden frame. The room smelled faintly of lavender, a scent Lucas had always liked, but it didn't comfort me now. I looked at the bed, at the spot where we had spent countless nights together, but it felt different, cold, like it had been waiting for someone else. The thought hit me like a sudden gust of wind. What if he had already moved on? What if, while I was lost in this house, he was already somewhere else, with someone else? The thought unsettled me, but it wouldn't leave. It clung to the edges of my mind like something I couldn't shake off. I moved closer to the bed, my feet heavy against the floor. I touched the blanket, the fabric soft and smooth under my fingertips. It didn't feel like it belonged to me anymore. I stood there for a long time, just staring at the bed, my breath shallow, my heart beating in slow, uneven rhythms. Feel like a betrayal. Why did it feel like a betrayal? I wanted to leave the room. I wanted to walk out of this house, leave it all behind, but my feet wouldn't move. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being pulled into something I didn't understand. It wasn't just the bed. It wasn't just the bed. It was everything, the house, the walls, the silence. Everything was wrong, and I couldn't find the source of it. I turned around and looked at the room again. The soft, muted light from the window cast long shadows on the floor. The room felt like a memory, one I couldn't quite place. I closed my eyes for a moment, trying to steady myself. When I opened them again, I found my gaze fixed on the door. The one we had always left open when we went to sleep. The door that had once led to shared dreams, quiet talks, laughter that echoed in the corners of the night, and canned pro-pam-pam. But now, it was just another doorway, leading somewhere I couldn't follow. I wanted to cry. I wanted to scream. But instead, I felt the weight of the silence settle deeper inside me. Kuro, the bed didn't feel like our bed anymore. The house didn't feel like our home. It was as though the walls had shifted, the air had changed, and I was the only one left in the rubble of it all. I stepped back from the bed, my feet unsure. The room felt smaller now, like it was closing in on me. The weight of everything I couldn't see pressed down on my chest. I wanted to run, but I didn't. Kick-ant. I turned toward the door. I didn't know where I was going. I didn't know what I was looking for. But I kept walking. I found myself in the living room, the space between the couch and the window where we used to sit. It was still the same, the worn leather couch, the pictures on the walls, the soft glow of the lamp in the corner. But none of it felt real anymore. It all felt like a dream, like something I had made up. I for a window. I walked toward the window, my fingers trailing along the curtains. The light outside was dim now, the sun starting to set. The sky was soft, washed with the orange glow of evening. It should have been peaceful. But it wasn't. I looked down at my hand, still holding the letter from earlier. The edges were curling, but the words hadn't changed. My marriage was over, and yet it still felt unreal. How could it be over? How could 10 years of my life be erased so easily, so coldly? I opened my hand, letting the letter fall onto the couch, watching it crumple slightly as it landed. The house was silent again. I stood there, just looking at the letter, and for a moment, I felt nothing but the weight of the air around me, pressing down, holding me in place. What had happened to us? To me? I didn't know. But the silence was growing, getting louder, filling the empty spaces inside the walls. I left the living room and walked into the kitchen, my feet still heavy, dragging me along. The house felt bigger now, more empty. I stood by the window, looking out into the fading light. It was quiet, too quiet, and I wondered if it would always feel this way. I didn't know how to answer that. I didn't know if I ever would. The phone buzzed again, sharp and sudden against the stillness of the kitchen. Hey, I was standing by the window, my eyes watching the last of the daylight slip beneath the horizon. The kitchen lights were off, just the soft glow of the evening seeping through the glass. But the sound of the phone, it sliced through everything like a warning. I glanced at the screen. A number I didn't recognize. I hesitated for a moment, my fingers frozen above the counter, but then I picked it up. My hand was steady, but my heart, it had picked up pace. The message was simple, short. I know what's going on, meet me. There was a name at the bottom of the text, but it didn't mean anything to me. I couldn't place it, couldn't remember it, but something about it made my chest tighten. I stared at the screen, trying to feel something, anger, confusion, anything, but all I could feel was an overwhelming sense of urgency. Who was this person, and what did they know? I set the phone down gently, almost as though I was afraid to break it. My hand stayed near the edge of the counter, trembling ever so slightly. The house was quiet again. Too quiet. I could hear the faint hum of the refrigerator in the background, the click of the clock on the wall, but those sounds didn't seem to reach me. The silence wrapped around me, thick and heavy, until I couldn't tell if I was suffocating or if it was just the weight of the moment. And my breath caught my throat. I reached for the phone again. I unlocked it, my fingers moving slower than usual. I stared at the message again, the name still unfamiliar, but the words? They felt like a punch, each letter sending a ripple through my chest. The house felt colder now, like it was listening, like the walls knew something I didn't. I ran my thumb across the screen, wondering if I should reply. But what would I say? How could I even begin to understand what was happening? The message sat there, like a challenge, like it was daring me to uncover something, but I didn't know what. I looked out the window again, the light almost gone. Now the streetlights flickering to life outside. The world seemed smaller, quieter, as though everything was waiting for something. Waiting for me. The name still lingered in my mind. I felt it there, like a shadow at the edge of my thoughts. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't place it. I stared at the phone again. What was I supposed to do? I stood there for a long time, just holding the phone, my thoughts swirling like a storm I couldn't stop. The silence seemed to press against me, growing heavier with every second. Then the phone buzzed again, breaking the stillness. This time, it was a call. I stared at the screen. The name wasn't familiar, but it didn't matter. It felt like I had no choice. I answered. The voice on the other end was low, calm, like it was all too easy to speak in this way. "Yeah, I think you should know," the voice said, "that he's been seeing her for months." The words didn't sink in at first. I wanted to say something, anything, but the sound of my own voice felt too far away. The voice continued, almost like it was reading from a script. "I can tell you everything you need to know. But you have to meet me." The words felt like a knife. They cut through everything I thought I knew. I didn't want to believe it, didn't want to hear it, but I couldn't escape it. My hand shook as I held the phone to my ear. My breath quickened. "You're not the first to find out," the voice said, the words flat, like they were already familiar. Like they were tired of telling the story. I didn't say anything. I couldn't. My throat had closed up. "Yant, come alone," the voice added before hanging up, and I stood there for a long time after, the phone still pressed to my ear, the quiet of the house swirling around me like smoke. I felt numb. I dropped the phone onto the counter, the click of it landing too loud in the silence. My hand curled into a fist at my side, but I didn't know what to do with it. Yeah, it wasn't the first time I'd suspected something. I'd seen the signs, the way Lucas had been distant, the late nights, the messages he'd left open on the phone. But this felt like confirmation. I looked around the kitchen again, the soft glow from the overhead light casting long shadows across the floor. The room felt bigger now. The silence felt thicker. What was I supposed to do? My eyes moved to the window again. The night was creeping in, but the streetlights outside felt like they were watching me, too. I closed my eyes for a moment, letting the darkness inside match the one outside. But it didn't stop the questions. Who was this person? Who knew about Lucas? And what did they want me to do? I thought about the message, the phone call, the words that hung in the air between us, that hung in the air between us. The house felt empty. The walls felt too quiet. I took a deep breath and grabbed the phone again, my fingers pressing the screen. I didn't know what I was looking for, but I searched through the messages. The same one stared back at me, the same name, the same invitation. I didn't know what it meant. I didn't know if I was ready for it, but I knew one thing. I couldn't stay here any longer. Sken. I grabbed my coat and headed for the door, and the cold air outside felt like a shock to my system, but it didn't stop me. The road ahead was unknown, but I couldn't stop moving. The house behind me stood still, like it was holding its breath. King. I walked into the cafe, the soft bell above the door chiming as I entered. The dim light inside made everything feel muted, like I had stepped into a memory instead of a place. Yeah. I paused for a moment, scanning the room. There were only a few people scattered around, their voices a low hum in the background. The smell of coffee and something sweet lingered in the air. It should have been comforting, but it felt wrong, like I was out of place. I saw her before she saw me. She was sitting at a small table in the back, her posture stiff, her hands wrapped around a cup like she was trying to hold on to something. The moment I saw her, something in me stirred, but I couldn't place it. She looked familiar, but not in a way that made sense. When she noticed me, she didn't smile. Her eyes held something, recognition maybe, but also something else. Something I didn't understand. I walked toward her, the sound of my shoes on the wooden floor suddenly too loud, like they were carrying the weight of my own hesitation. I sat down across from her. The chair creaked under me, and I adjusted myself without looking at her. I wasn't sure what to say, but I knew I needed to hear it. Her eyes didn't leave mine, but they softened just a little. She put her cup down slowly. "I've known Lucas for years," she said, her voice low and steady, like she had rehearsed the words. I nodded, my chest tightening, not knowing where this conversation was going, but sensing it wasn't good. She shifted in her seat, her fingers tapping lightly on the table, a quiet rhythm that made the silence between us seem even thicker. You know him, don't you?" she asked. I swallowed, the words thick in my throat. "I thought I did, have Genskit star." She nodded, almost like she understood. "It's more than just business with us, has been for months." The words hit me like a physical blow. My breath caught in my throat, and I felt my stomach drop, like the ground had suddenly shifted beneath me. I looked at her, trying to piece together the fragments of what she had just said. It didn't make sense. Kesaponi. Sepasapa one gernasa samabafa. He's been seeing someone else, she said, the words falling from her lips without hesitation. For months now. The world around me seemed to blur, the noise of the cafe fading into a distant hum. My heart pounded in my chest, each beat louder than the last. I didn't know what to feel. Anger? Betrayal? Or was it just disbelief? The kind of disbelief that makes you question if what you're hearing is even real? I couldn't say anything. I just sat there, staring at her, trying to make sense of the words, but they felt like they were slipping through my fingers. He doesn't talk about you, you know, she said quietly, not like I thought he would. I flinched, and she noticed. Her eyes softened again, but there was something too knowing in them. Something that made me feel like I wasn't the one who had the answers. How long? I finally managed, my voice barely above a whisper. 4 months, she said. I don't know if you saw the signs, but he's been pulling away for a while. It wasn't just about business. The phrase hung in the air between us like a weight that I couldn't move. I wanted to ask more. I wanted to yell, to demand an explanation, but I stayed silent. The woman across from me wasn't the one I was angry with, but somehow I was still angry. Angry at myself, angry at Lucas, angry at everything I couldn't control. I don't want to be here, I said, the words slipping out before I could stop them. My voice cracked, and I felt a sharp sting behind my eyes. She didn't react. She just watched me, her gaze steady. Wah-fur-wam. I'm not here to hurt you, she said softly, but there was something in her tone, a kind of finality that made me feel like I was hearing the end of something. I stared at her for a moment, trying to find the words, but they wouldn't come. Instead, I felt something settle in the pit of my stomach, something heavy and cold, like I was standing in the shadow of something I couldn't outrun. I don't know what you want from me, I said, my voice quieter now, as though the words were sinking into the space between us, drowning in the silence. I just wanted you to know, she said, her eyes never leaving mine, what he's been doing. What's been going on? I nodded, even though I wasn't sure if I understood. The pieces of the puzzle were still scattered in my mind, and I couldn't make them fit together. I wanted to leave. I wanted to run out of that cafe and never look back, but I couldn't move. I was still frozen in place, caught in this conversation I hadn't asked for. I didn't know it would end like this, she said, her voice soft, almost regretful. Money might count on liked it. What might? But I didn't know if she was talking about me or about Lucas. I didn't know if I cared anymore. The room felt smaller now, the dim lights above us casting long shadows on the table. I felt like I was sinking, slowly, as the reality of everything she had said started to settle around me. I don't know what to do with this, I said, my hands gripping the edge of the table. She didn't answer. She just nodded, the silence between us growing longer, heavier. And I realized, in that moment, that I didn't need her to give me answers. The answers were already inside me, buried under all the years, the lies, and the quiet moments I hadn't noticed. I stood up, slowly, the chair scraping softly against the floor. I didn't look at her as I turned to leave, but before I reached the door, I stopped. I turned back, just for a moment. I don't know why you're telling me this, I said, my voice raw but steady. Her eyes softened again. Because you deserve to know. And with that, I walked out of the cafe, the door closing softly behind me, leaving her and her words in the dim light, beep-pop-der, and the world outside waiting for me to make sense of it all. But I wasn't ready to face it yet. Not completely, not yet. Hecka. The afternoon light filtered through the blinds, casting long, narrow shadows across the kitchen floor. It should have been peaceful. It should have felt like the warmth of the sun, but instead, it felt like it was pressing down on me. I sat at the kitchen table, my laptop open in front of me. The quiet buzz of the refrigerator was the only sound that filled the space. I wasn't sure where to start, but I knew I had to start somewhere. I clicked through email after email, each one a thread of Lucas's life, a life I thought I knew. I had seen these messages before, glanced at them while he'd been away or distracted. I had never thought much of them, not until now. Now each message felt like a piece of a puzzle, each word heavier than the last. The room felt colder than it had when I walked in, and my fingers hovered over the keyboard, hesitating. The silence seemed to reach out and wrap around me, stifling the air. I started with the messages. I opened one from a woman named Ellie. The words were short, but the tone was familiar. Too familiar. I read it twice, and then a third time. It didn't make sense. I clicked through more messages, each one more intimate than the last. There were photos, too, some I'd never seen before. They were simple, innocuous, at first glance. But as I scrolled, I saw it. The way he smiled in them, the way he looked at her. It wasn't the look of a man with a wife waiting at home. My heart beat heavier with each message, each photo, like the weight of the world was pressing down on me. Hey, I closed the laptop for a moment, leaning back in the chair. The room seemed to tilt slightly, the walls closing in, but I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. I stared at the table, my eyes unfocused. How had I never noticed? How had I never seen the signs? I stood up, the chair scraping loudly against the floor, and walked over to the counter. My hand reached for the bank statements scattered across it. I didn't even know why I had them. I didn't remember asking for them, but now they felt like a necessary part of the story I hadn't been told. Okay, I unfolded one of the papers, my eyes skimming the numbers. It didn't take long for Morphisa, but it didn't take long for me to see it. The transactions were different. Too many dinners, too many trips. There were places I didn't recognize, things I hadn't been told about. I set the statement down, the paper crinkling as it landed. It felt like a weight had been lifted off my chest, but the emptiness of the room only grew. I walked back to the table, the coldness of the kitchen floor against my feet. The truth was starting to settle in, and it felt like I was sinking deeper into it with each breath. I picked up my phone, scrolling through old pictures of us. I couldn't bring myself to delete them, but they seemed different now. They didn't feel like memories anymore. They felt like lies. I looked at the photos of Lucas and me. Smiling faces, vacations we'd taken, celebrations, quiet moments. They had all been real at one point, hadn't they? But now I wasn't sure. I wasn't sure about anything. The words "I know him" echoed in my mind, words from that stranger, the woman who had shown me just how little I knew. She had told me things I hadn't wanted to hear, things I wasn't ready to face. I put the phone down, standing up again, pacing now. My mind felt like it was racing, but my body felt frozen. Why hadn't I seen it before? Why had I been blind to the things that were right in front of me? I grabbed another bank statement, more numbers, more words, more things I didn't understand. But the pieces were starting to fit together, and with each new thing I uncovered, I felt like I was losing a piece of myself. I looked down at the floor, the silence now overwhelming. It felt like I was standing in the middle of a room I didn't recognize, and everything around me was a reflection of someone I didn't know. How had he hidden all of this from me? How had he kept it from me for so long? I thought about all the times I had asked him, all the times I had wondered where he'd been, why he'd been late. And every time, he'd given me some excuse, some reason I had believed. I had believed him. I walked to the living room, the coldness of the kitchen still lingering in my skin. I sank into the couch, the cushions unfamiliar, as though they had never held my weight before. I looked around, trying to see the room as it had once been. But now, it was just a space filled with shadows. I closed my eyes for a moment, letting the silence wash over me. The truth was there, heavy and undeniable, but I couldn't reach it, grasp. It felt like it was always just out of my grasp. I opened my eyes, my gaze drifting to the window. The sky was turning darker now, the last light of the day fading away, but the shadows were growing longer in the room. The house felt bigger somehow, or maybe I was just smaller in it. The weight of everything was starting to crush me, the truth, the betrayal, the realization that I hadn't seen it, that I hadn't known. I closed my eyes again, trying to steady myself. But the more I tried to push it away, the stronger the feeling became. I thought about Lucas, about the way he had looked at me earlier, the laughter, the coldness in his eyes. And I wondered, as I sat in the darkening room, if I would ever be able to look at him the same way again. The house was quiet, the only sound the soft hum of the refrigerator in the distance. I could feel the silence pressing against me, thick and heavy, but I wasn't sure if I wanted it to end. The weight of the truth felt like it would break me, but it didn't. It just sat there, heavy and still, like it had always been there, waiting for me to notice. I stared at the window, watching the last of the light slip away, and I wondered if this was the beginning of the end, or if it had already started long before I had realized. Either way, I wasn't sure if I was ready to face what I had uncovered, but it was already too late. The glow on the computer screen hummed ever heim. The glow of the computer screen cast a pale light across my face, too bright in the dark room. The room where I used to feel safe, where I used to feel like I belonged. I had spent hours searching, scrolling through endless pages, chasing down fragments of truth. Each click seemed to pull me deeper into a place I wasn't sure I could return from. Her name kept coming up, Ellie. I wasn't sure when I first saw it, but it was there now, in every thread, every search result. Ellie, a name that seemed to haunt me from the edges of the screen. The more I searched, the more she appeared. Photos, comments, her smile in every picture. I found her profile on social media. The bright colors of her photos contrasting with the dull gray of my thoughts. She was smiling in each one. Her face lit up with the kind of joy I had once thought I shared with Lucas. Yeah, her smile was familiar, but I couldn't place it. There was something about her that felt both distant and personal at the same time. Yeah, I scrolled through her feed, unable to stop myself. Her posts were full of pictures of places I didn't recognize, sunsets, beaches, moments that seemed to belong to someone else's life. Her life, and Lucas was in them. I blinked, my eyes stinging from the screen. There he was, smiling, holding her hand, standing on a pier I didn't know, in a city I hadn't visited. I clicked on a picture of them at a dinner table, a glass of wine between them, the light from the candles flickering in the background. They looked so comfortable. I froze on that image. I didn't know if it was the look on his face, or the way they were so at ease with each other, their fond how, but it struck me hard. It wasn't just the betrayal, it was the realization that these were the moments I hadn't known about. The ones I had never seen, never been a part of. I couldn't stop staring at her face. The way she looked at him, the way she smiled, like she was the one who had his heart. Like I never existed in the spaces they shared. It was her eyes. They didn't look like mine. They looked like the eyes of someone who had something that belonged to me. I leaned back in the chair, my fingers numb on the keyboard. The room felt smaller, the walls seemed closer. I didn't know if I could breathe, or if I even wanted to. I clicked through more photos, more trips, more smiles. There were things Lucas had never told me, places he'd never mentioned, things he'd hidden in plain sight, behind laughter and stories I had believed. I thought about confronting him. But now, here she was, Ellie, a stranger. The one whose name I had never heard, whose face I had never seen. She wasn't a stranger anymore. Should I reach out? Ask her what she knew? Ask her how long this had been going on? Just chasing shadows? Was it better to leave her out of it? To let Lucas face whatever I found? Yes. I closed the laptop, my fingers lingering on the edge, like I could hold on to the moment just a little longer before it slipped away. I sat in the quiet, letting the weight of everything settle into the silence. There was nothing to say. Nothing I could do, not yet. I thought about Ellie's smile, about the way she looked at him, the way they fit together. How long had this been going on? How long had I been living in the shadow of their secret? I rose from the chair, pacing around the room, the floor creaking beneath me. Each step felt heavy, like I was walking through water, pushing against something I couldn't see but could feel all the same. I couldn't stop thinking about her face. It was too familiar, too bright, too easy. Uck and I stood by the window, staring out at the darkened street. The lights flickered outside, casting long shadows across the pavement. The night felt cold, like everything was holding its breath. What was I supposed to do with this knowledge, with this new world that had opened up beneath my feet? Should I confront her, or was she just another piece in this twisted game? A game that I didn't understand, one where I had never known the rules. Oh, I pressed my forehead to the cold glass of the window, the chill seeping through my skin. I thought about Ellie again. She wasn't the one I was angry at, but she felt like a symbol of everything I had missed. Everything I had been too blind to see. Maybe she was just a victim too, but maybe she wasn't. Maybe she knew exactly what she was doing, and maybe Lucas did too. The weight of it all pushed down on me again, the betrayal, the lies. I wasn't sure what hurt more, the things I had seen or the things I hadn't. I let out a breath, slow and steady, but it didn't feel like enough. I wasn't sure if anything ever would. The house was too quiet, too still. I could feel the air around me, thick with everything unsaid. I turned away from the window, the glass cold against my palm. I couldn't stay there. I couldn't keep asking myself what I should do next. I needed to breathe. I needed to think. I walked down the hallway, my feet dragging on the floor. The kitchen light flickered as I passed, casting shadows on the walls. I thought about Ellie's face again, about Lucas, standing beside her, smiling in ways he'd never smiled with me. Maybe she was just another part of the lie, or maybe she was the truth. Yeah. I didn't know which one scared me more. I didn't know what I was supposed to do with that, but I knew I had to decide soon. Okay. I turned off the light in the kitchen, the darkness swallowing the room whole, and for a moment, everything was still. The world, waiting for me to make sense of it all, and I wasn't sure I could. And the walk to her door felt like it took hours, though it was only a few blocks. The pavement felt uneven beneath my feet, each step a little heavier than the last. The air was thick with the scent of rain, but the clouds hadn't quite burst open yet. It was just a waiting game, like everything had paused, holding its breath. When I reached her street, I stopped for a moment, standing in front of the row of houses, their windows dark like empty. I hadn't planned on standing there so long, but I couldn't move. My hands were shaking, my heart thudding in my chest like it was trying to escape. I looked at the house in front of me, the porch light flickering. The door was small, unassuming, but I could feel the weight of it, the threshold I was about to cross. I reached up to press the doorbell. My fingers brushed the cold button. A quick, sharp sound rang out in the stillness. It didn't feel like my hand. It felt like it belonged to someone else, someone who wasn't sure of what she was doing, but was already too far gone to stop. Anne. The door swung open slowly. She stood there, Ellie. There was no surprise in her eyes, no shock, no curiosity. Resignation. I stared at her, my words stuck in my throat. She didn't move, didn't flinch. Her face was calm, her posture almost practiced, like this was something she had seen before, something she was expecting. Yeah, her eyes flicked down to my hands, still trembling by my sides. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. Can I come in? My voice was quieter than I meant it to be. It felt strange, asking. It felt like I was asking for permission to be somewhere I didn't belong. She stepped aside without a word, and I walked past her, the warmth from inside brushing against my skin as I crossed the threshold. I stopped in the hallway, unsure of what to do next. The silence in the house was suffocating. The wall seemed too close. There was a faint smell of perfume in the air, and the low hum of a television from the other room. The normal sounds of a life I wasn't a part of. Count. I turned to face her, and her eyes met mine again, but there was nothing in them. Nothing to fight back with. I didn't know you, I said, my voice cracking before I could stop it. I didn't know any of this. She just nodded, the kind of nod that says she's heard it before. It wasn't sympathy. It wasn't apology. It was just, understanding. You knew about me, didn't you? I asked, my hands clenching into fists at my sides. You knew about us. I knew, she said simply, without hesitation. I blinked, swallowing the bitterness that rose in my throat. Then why? Why do this? Why hurt him? And me? She stepped back into the living room, her eyes never leaving mine. He promised me things, she said quietly. A life, a future. My chest tightened, and I took a step toward her, almost involuntarily. And you just, my voice faltered. You just went along with it? Yeah. She looked at me then, really looked at me, and for a moment, there was something in her gaze that softened. It was the slightest shift, but I caught it. She wasn't a monster. She wasn't the enemy. She was just lost. Tudren senfortiply consticeptbert saptatundina fur soptot. Yes, she said, her voice steady but not cold. He made promises. I shook my head, my mind spinning. But how could he? How could he do this to me, to us? Ellie didn't answer right away. She turned away from me, walking to the window, her back to me for a long moment. The light from outside bathed her in a soft glow. She didn't look back. I took a step forward, my feet moving of their own accord, and stood in the same spot she had just been. What kind of man does this? I asked quietly, almost to myself. She let out a soft sigh, the sound just loud enough for me to hear. She paused for a long time before speaking again. The kind that believes in what he wants, she said, her words slow, deliberate. The kind that forgets what he already has. And the kind that doesn't care who gets hurt along the way. I could feel the weight of her words settle between us, thick and unyielding. I had spent so much time wondering what kind of man Lucas was, but now I could see him through her eyes, through the pieces of this strange puzzle she was handing me. I felt hollow. Her voice broke through my thoughts. I didn't want to hurt you. I couldn't help the small laugh that escaped me. It wasn't a laugh, not really. It was the sound of something breaking. You didn't want to hurt me? I repeated, my voice barely above a whisper. Then why? She didn't answer. She didn't answer. She didn't, Arrow. She didn't need to. She just stood there, staring out the window, as if the answer was something that had always been there, something she didn't need to explain. The weight of the silence between us grew. The tension that had been simmering in the room since I walked through the door was finally breaking, but it didn't feel like relief. It felt like the slow, inevitable release of everything I had been holding in. I looked down at the floor, my mind spinning, my chest tight. I could still see Lucas's face, the way he had looked at me, the way he had laughed. And now, here she was, standing in front of me, a stranger and yet not. I wanted to scream. I wanted to rage, but I didn't. Instead, I just stood there, quiet. Ellie didn't look at me as I walked past her, heading for the door. She didn't stop me, didn't say anything else. I stood at the doorway, my hand on the knob. The house felt smaller now, the air thick with everything I had learned and everything I still didn't understand. I never wanted this, I said, my voice softer now. She didn't look at me. She just nodded again, and it was enough. I stepped outside, the cool air hitting my skin like a breath of fresh air, but it didn't change anything. I still couldn't breathe. The door closed softly behind me, but the world around me felt different. It felt heavy, and as I stood there, the first drops of rain finally started to fall. The porch light was still on when I pulled into the driveway. That soft yellow circle on the concrete looked smaller than I remembered, like it was trying to mind its business. The engine kept running. I sat there with my hands on the wheel, listening to the tick of cooling metal. The house didn't rush me, it waited. Somewhere inside, the clock over the stove was still losing time. Somewhere inside, everything I had believed was still pretending to stand. I breathed once, then again, and told myself this was just another night coming home. I finally turned the key and the engine went quiet. Too quiet. The air smelled like damp earth and cut grass. The neighbor's sprinklers were hissing, steady and patient. Life going on, unbothered. I stepped out of the car and felt the gravel shift under my shoe, like it wasn't sure about me either. Inside, the house was dim, one lamp on in the living room. Lucas always left it on. Said it made the place feel less empty when he came home late. I never questioned it before. I set my keys down slowly. The sound echoed more than it should have. My bag slid off my shoulder and landed by the door. I didn't move it. I didn't move much at all. I just stood there, letting the walls remind me of themselves. The scuff near the hallway, the picture frame we never straightened, the dent in the couch cushion where he always sat. Everything looked the same. That was the problem. My mind wouldn't slow down. It kept replaying pieces like a film stuck between frames. Words said, words not said. The way Lucas had smiled earlier that day, quick, careful, like he was measuring something I couldn't see. All my life I'd believed choices were loud, that they announced themselves. But this one had been sitting quietly for years. I walked into the kitchen. The floor creaked once, right near the sink. I remembered how I used to joke that the house talked back. Now it just sounded tired. There was a mug in the sink. His coffee dried into a brown ring. I touched it with my finger, then pulled back like it might burn. Such a small thing to feel heavy. I opened the fridge without thinking. Light spilled out. Leftovers stacked neatly, milk close to empty. The normal math of a shared life. 2 people, 1 routine. Lucas wasn't home yet. I'd known that. Still, my chest tightened when I realized it again. I sat at the table, the same chair, the one that wobbled if you leaned too far back. I pressed my feet flat on the floor and waited for the shaking inside me to settle. This was the moment, I told myself. This quiet stretch before anything happened. I could confront him, lay everything out, ask the questions I'd been carrying like stones in my pockets, demand answers, truth, something solid to stand on. Or I could let go, not slam doors, not shout, just stop holding on. The clock ticked. Each second landed heavy, like it expected a decision. Lucas came home an hour later. I heard his key before I saw him, the familiar jingle, the pause before the door opened. He stepped inside and smiled when he saw me at the table. "Hey," he said. "Hey," I answered. He set his jacket down carefully, too carefully. He didn't sit, just stood there, hands loose at his sides. Waiting, I studied his face, the lines I knew, the ones I'd traced with my thumb on slow mornings. Nothing looked different. And yet everything was. "You okay?" he asked. I nodded, then shook my head. "I don't know," I said. My voice sounded far away, like it belonged to someone else. And he pulled out the chair across from me but didn't sit, just rested his hand on it. His knuckles were pale. I could feel the question pressing up against my ribs. The one I'd rehearsed 100 times on the drive home. It waited for me to say it right. But when I opened my mouth, something else came out. Do you ever feel like you're standing on something that isn't there anymore? I asked. He didn't answer right away. He looked down, then back at me. I think so. He said that was it. Rank. No denial, no reassurance. Just space. In that space, I understood something quietly. The way truth sometimes arrives. Not like a storm, more like a light turning on in a room you've been avoiding. I realized I didn't want explanations. I wanted ground, and I didn't have it anymore. Later, I stood in the doorway of the bedroom. Lucas was asleep, or pretending to be. His back was turned, the rise and fall of it steady, practiced. I watched him for a long moment, memorizing the shape of someone I might soon become a stranger to. I didn't pack a bag, not yet. I just stepped back into the hallway and turned off the light. The house settled around me, wood and memory sighing together. Outside, the porch light still burned, patient as ever. I reached out and flipped it off. The dark didn't feel scary, just honest. I stood there, barefoot on the cool floor, knowing I didn't have to decide tonight. But also knowing I couldn't stay standing forever. The lamp in the living room flickered once before it settled. Just a blink, like the house clearing its throat. I was already sitting on the couch, hands folded in my lap, feeling the fabric press familiar patterns into my skin. Outside, the wind pushed against the windows without asking permission. Somewhere down the street, a dog barked and then stopped. I didn't turn the TV on. I didn't open a book. I waited. The clock on the wall moved too loud for something so small. Every second sounded like it knew why it was there. The living room smelt faintly of dust and old coffee. Not unpleasant, just lived in. The curtains were half drawn, letting the streetlight carve thin lines across the floor. They stopped right at Lucas's chair, the one he always claimed even when guests came over. I stayed on my side of the couch, muscle memory, space learned over years. My body felt calm in a way my mind didn't trust, like the moment before a storm breaks, when the air goes still and heavy, and birds forget what they're supposed to do. I thought about all the other conversations we'd had here, laughing ones, tired ones, the kind where we talked about groceries and weekend plans and which plant needed more water. I thought about how often we'd sat close without really touching. I tried to remember the last time he'd looked at me without thinking first. The front door opened softly, not slammed, not rushed. Lucas stepped inside and closed it behind him, careful with the latch. He took off his shoes and lined them up like he always did, order where he could find it. When he saw me, he paused. "Hey," he said. His voice sounded smaller than usual. "Hi," I said. "Yeah." He nodded, like that was enough to hold us for a moment. He sat in his chair slowly. The cushions sighed under him. I noticed his hands before his face. They were clasped together, thumbs rubbing the same tired circle. He'd always done that when he was nervous, though he never admitted to being nervous. The space between us felt crowded, full of things we weren't saying. "I didn't mean for it to go this far," he said. I looked at the lamp instead of him. The light was warm, too warm for what we were about to do. "I know," I said. He swallowed. "I'm sorry." The word landed on the floor between us and stayed there. It didn't reach me. It didn't try. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "I never wanted to hurt you." I nodded again. My neck moved easily, like it had practiced this motion already, but "you did," I said. "Not sharp, not soft. Just true." He exhaled through his nose and stared at the carpet. There was a small stain near his foot. I wondered how long it had been there, how many nights we'd ignored it together. "I don't know how to explain it," he said. "I got lost, like something misplaced itself." I waited for more. He didn't give it. The silence stretched. It wasn't empty. It was full of everything he wasn't saying, of everything I suddenly knew I couldn't pull out of him, no matter how gently I asked. I felt something rise in my chest, not anger, not yet, something closer to grief but quieter. Like a door closing in another room, I wanted to scream, to ask why I hadn't been enough. Why the life we built wasn't heavy enough to hold him in place. Instead, I asked one question: why? The word felt small when it left my mouth, fragile, like it might break before it reached him. Lucas looked up at me then. Really looked. His eyes were tired, wet, but not crying. Like he'd already done that part somewhere else. He opened his mouth, closed it. He stared at me like he was waiting for me to finish the sentence, for me to arrive at something on my own. I don't know how to say it, he said finally. Yeah, I studied his face, the lines around his eyes, the familiarity that suddenly felt borrowed. That's when I understood. There was no answer that would make sense, no reason that would give me back what I'd lost. He wasn't waiting to explain, he was waiting for me to accept it, and I realized in that quiet, awful clarity, that understanding wasn't the same as staying. We sat there a little longer. The wind outside picked up again, rattling the window just enough to remind us of the world beyond this room. Lucas said my name once, like he might still save something. I stood up before he could try. My legs felt steady. That surprised me. I walked past him toward the hallway, my fingers brushing the wall. The paint was cool, solid, more real than anything he'd said all night. Behind me, he didn't follow. He didn't call out again. In the doorway, I stopped and looked back once. He was still sitting there, hands clasped, eyes fixed on the floor, waiting for something I could no longer give. I turned off the lamp. The room fell into shadow, quiet and honest. And as I stood there in the dark, I knew this wasn't the end. But it was the last time I would ask him why. The house didn't make a sound when I woke up. No hum from the fridge, no pipes knocking in the walls. Morning light slipped in through the blinds, thin and pale, resting on the floor like it wasn't sure it belonged there. I lay still, listening for something familiar. His footsteps, the clearing of a throat, the rustle of keys. Nothing answered. And the silence felt different now, not waiting, not holding its breath, it just was. You can't. And for the first time, I understood that quiet could mean something had ended, not that something was about to begin. I got out of bed slowly, my feet touching the floor one at a time. The wood was cold, honest. The hallway stretched out in front of me, longer than it ever had before. Every door stood exactly where it always had, but none of them felt like mine anymore. The mirror in the bathroom caught me by surprise. I looked older, not in years, just in knowing. My face held something steadier now, something worn smooth by truth. I touched the edge of the sink, grounding myself in porcelain and habit. I made coffee out of instinct. 2 scoops. Then, I stopped and poured one back into the tin. The kettle clicked off when it was ready, like it always had. Muscle memory doesn't grieve, it just continues. I sat at the table with my mug and watched the steam rise. The chair across from me stayed empty. It didn't accuse me, it didn't plead, it just existed, like an object that had finished its purpose. Outside, a car passed. Somewhere, someone laughed. Life stitched itself together without asking my permission. I realized then. I wasn't waiting for him to come back, I was waiting for myself to catch up. The living room held onto his shape longer than the rest of the house. His jacket still hung by the door. I brushed past it, the fabric grazing my arm like a ghost of warmth. I didn't move it. Not yet. I sat on the couch, this time in the middle. The cushion dipped beneath me, unfamiliar without his weight pulling it sideways. The lamp stayed off. I let the daylight do what it could. My phone buzzed once. A message from someone checking in, no questions. Just a heart emoji. I placed the phone face down and let it rest. I thought about the words he'd said. And the ones he hadn't, they replayed quietly, without sharp edges now. Just facts. Just moments that no longer needed fixing. The story had reached its end whether I approved or not. I picked up a picture frame from the shelf. Us at the lake, his arm around my shoulder. My smile wide and unguarded. I studied it like it belonged to someone else. Like evidence of a life I'd once lived very well. I loved you, I said aloud. The room didn't argue. I set the frame back down, turned face first this time, not in anger, just in acknowledgement. It came to me slowly, the way real truths often do. Nothing had been stolen from me. Not really. What I lost was the future I kept rehearsing, the one where effort guaranteed permanence, the one where love was enough to keep someone from drifting. I had built myself around that belief, let it define the edges of who I was, and when it collapsed, I thought I had gone with it. But standing there, barefoot in a quiet room, I realized something softer. I was still here, my hands still worked. My breath still found its rhythm. My heart, bruised, tired, still knew how to notice light. I didn't need to put the pieces back together. They didn't fit because they weren't meant to anymore. This wasn't a puzzle to solve. It was a doorway. I opened the front door and stepped outside. The air smelled like rain that hadn't happened yet. The sky hung low and gray, undecided. I liked that. It felt honest. I stood there longer than necessary, letting the breeze move through me, letting the weight lift, not all at once, but enough to stand straighter. I didn't know what came next. But I knew what was finished. By evening, the house held me differently, less like a witness, more like a shell I was ready to outgrow. I packed one box, just one, old letters, a sweater that still smelled like him, things I wasn't ready to forgive or throw away. I placed the box by the door and turned off the lights room by room. Each click felt final, but not cruel. In the bedroom, I paused. The bed looked too big now. Or maybe it always had been. I opened the window an inch and let the night air in. Somewhere, crickets started their song. Steady, unbothered, I lay down and closed my eyes, not to sleep, but to listen. Wakans. To the quiet that didn't hurt anymore. To the space where something new might grow. I didn't know who I was becoming, but for the first time in a long while, I was curious.